The dust settled on the lonely desert road as Delilah Byrne clutched her wailing infant to her breast, her parched lips cracked and bleeding in the merciless New Mexico sun of 1876. She had walked for miles from the abandoned homestead where her husband had drawn his last breath just 3 days prior, her water canteen now as empty as her stomach and her hopes. Las Lunas, the small settlement that had promised them a new beginning, seemed to mock her from the distance. The town's faint silhouette wavered in the heat mirage, still at least half a day's journey away. Her baby boy, barely 6 months old, cried incessantly, his tiny body racked with hunger. Delilah's milk had dried up the day before, her own body too deprived to provide for her child. "Hush now, Samuel," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "We'll find something soon." She stumbled, catching herself on a weathered fence post that marked someone's boundary line. Her dress, once a cheerful blue calico, hung dirty and torn around her gaunt frame. The small bundle of possessions she carried a worn quilt, a change of clothes for the baby, and the gold locket her mother had given her weighed heavier with each step. The sound of hoofbeats made her heart race. In these parts, strangers could mean salvation or doom. Delilah turned toward the sound, one hand shielding her eyes from the glare, the other holding Samuel close to her chest. A lone rider approached, his silhouette growing larger against the backdrop of the endless sky. Zachary Jones pulled back on his reins, slowing his chestnut mare as he spotted the woman and child on the road. At 30 years old, he'd seen enough of life's hardships to recognize desperation when he saw it. He'd been riding for 2 days, heading back to his small ranch outside Las Lunas after delivering cattle to Santa Fe. "Madam," he called out, keeping a respectful distance. "Are you in need of assistance?" Delilah swayed on her feet, pride warring with necessity. "We're just traveling to Las Lunas," she managed, her voice barely audible over her child's cries. Zachary dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding as his boots hit the ground. His face, tanned from years under the sun, was partially hidden by the shadow of his hat brim, but Delilah could see concern in his green eyes. "Your little one sounds mighty hungry," he said, approaching slowly as if she were a skittish colt. "When's the last time either of you had something to eat?" The simple question broke what remained of her composure. "Yesterday morning," she admitted, tears cutting clean tracks down her dirt-stained cheeks. I have nothing left for him." Zachary nodded, no judgment in his gaze. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I've got a loaf of sourdough here. Bought it fresh in Santa Fe, was saving it for my supper, but sounds like you two need it more than I do." He unwrapped the bread, breaking off a small piece. "If you soak a bit in water, your baby might be able to take it. Got some jerky too, and half a canteen of water." Delilah stared at the offered food, hunger making her dizzy. "I can't take your last provisions, sir." "Name's Zachary Jones," he said, ignoring her protest and gently pressing the bread into her free hand. "And yes, madam, you can. There's more where that came from in Las Lunas." With trembling fingers, Delilah accepted the bread. She quickly dipped a tiny piece into the water he offered and pressed it to her baby's lips. Samuel quieted immediately, his little mouth working at the unexpected nourishment. "Thank you," she whispered, tears flowing freely now. "My name is Delilah Byrne. This is my son, Samuel." Zachary tipped his hat. "Mrs. Byrne, it's clear you and your boy aren't fit to walk to town. My ranch is just a few miles from here. I can offer you a proper meal, a safe place to rest, and a ride into Las Lunas tomorrow if that's still where you're headed." Delilah hesitated, wariness flickering across her face. A woman alone had to be careful, especially with a child to protect. Zachary seemed to read her thoughts. "I understand your caution, Mrs. Byrne. If it helps, Mrs. Garcia, who runs the general store in town, will vouch for me. I've lived in these parts for 5 years now, keep mostly to myself and my cattle." The baby had quieted, sucking eagerly on the bread. Delilah's legs felt like they might give out at any moment. "I'm a widow," she said finally. My husband Thomas died of fever 3 days ago at our homestead about 15 miles back. We were trying to make a new start. Zachary's expression softened. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Byrne. All the more reason not to be alone right now. Let me help you. In the end, necessity won out over caution. Zachary helped her onto his horse, mounting behind her with the baby secured between them, and turned toward his ranch. The Jones homestead came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, a corral with a few horses, and what appeared to be a productive vegetable garden. Smoke rose from the chimney, surprising Delilah. My ranch hand, Miguel, must have returned from checking the north pasture, Zachary explained as they approached. He's been with me since I settled here. Good man, has a wife and 2 boys in town. As they dismounted, a middle-aged Mexican man emerged from the barn. He nodded respectfully to Delilah before addressing Zachary in a mix of Spanish and English. Senor Jones, I was not expecting you until tomorrow. The fence on the north side is fixed and I've prepared some stew. Gracias, Miguel. This is Mrs. Byrne and her son. They'll be staying the night. Would you mind riding into town to let Mrs. Garcia know we'll need some supplies for an infant tomorrow? Miguel nodded, his kind eyes taking in Delilah's condition without comment. She, of course. My Rosa can bring by some goat's milk for the little one tonight. We have plenty. That would be most appreciated, Delilah said, finding her voice. Thank you. After Miguel departed, Zachary showed Delilah into the cabin. It was simple but clean, with a main room containing a table, chairs, and a stone fireplace, plus 2 small bedrooms off to the side. You and the baby can take my room tonight, Zachary said, gesturing to the larger of the 2. I'll bunk in Miguel's room since he'll be staying in town with his family. He ladled stew into a bowl for her, setting it on the table with more of the sourdough bread. Eat slowly if it's been a while, he advised. Too much too quick will make you sick. Delilah nodded, settling into a chair with Samuel in her lap. The baby had fallen into an exhausted sleep, his small face still pinched with hunger. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly, looking up at the tall cowboy who moved about the cabin with ease. Helping strangers, Zachary paused, seemingly considering his answer. When I first came out west, I was barely 20, full of dreams and not much else. Got caught in a blizzard up in Colorado, would have died if an old trapper hadn't found me and shared what little he had. Figured I'd pass on the kindness. He sat across from her, pushing the bread closer. Now eat, Mrs. Byrne, you need your strength for that boy of yours. As night fell, Delilah found herself clean for the first time in days, wearing one of Zachary's shirts as a nightgown while her own clothes dried by the fire after a quick wash. Miguel's wife, Rosa, had indeed brought goat's milk, feeding little Samuel herself while instructing Delilah on how to mix it properly with water for an infant. In the quiet of Zachary's bedroom, with her son finally sleeping peacefully in a makeshift cradle fashioned from a drawer, Delilah let herself cry silently for all she had lost. The security of her marriage, the dreams they'd had coming west, the future that had seemed so promising just weeks ago. She didn't hear the door creak open, didn't realize Zachary had entered until he spoke softly. Mrs. Byrne, I brought you some tea. He set a steaming cup on the bedside table, his face illuminated only by the small oil lamp. My mother always said willow bark tea helps with sorrow as well as pain. Delilah wiped her tears hastily. Thank you, and please call me Delilah. After what you've done for us today, formalities seem unnecessary. He nodded, his gaze falling on the sleeping baby. He's a strong one, your Samuel, takes after his mother, I'd wager. I wasn't strong today, she admitted. I was failing him. No, Zachary said firmly. You were walking miles in the desert heat with no water to find help for your child after burying your husband. That's not failure, Delilah. That's the kind of strength most men I know couldn't muster. His words settled over her like a bomb. Thank you, Zachary. Zach, he corrected with a small smile. Only my mother ever called me Zachary, and that was when I was in trouble. The moment stretched between them, strangely comfortable despite their brief acquaintance. Finally, Zach cleared his throat. We'll head into Las Lunas tomorrow. Miguel's wife mentioned there might be work at the hotel. They're short-handed with laundry and cooking. If you're interested, Delilah nodded. I'll take any honest work I can get. I need to provide for Samuel. Well, rest tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about the future. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. And Delilah, you're welcome to stay here as long as you need, work or no work. This territory's hard enough without facing it alone with a child. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with a curious warmth that had nothing to do with the tea. The morning brought the smell of coffee and bacon, and Delilah found herself actually hungry for the first time in days. She dressed quickly in her now clean dress, fed Samuel with the goat's milk Rosa had left, and ventured into the main room. Zach stood at the stove, his back to her, humming softly as he turned bacon in a cast iron skillet. Without his hat, she could see his hair was a dark brown, almost black, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He'd shaved, and the clean line of his jaw made him look younger than she'd initially thought. "Good morning," she said, and he turned with a smile that transformed his face. "There you are. Wasn't sure how long you'd sleep. You looked like you needed it. Coffee's hot, eggs are coming up, and Miguel brought fresh bread from town this morning." Delilah settled Samuel in her lap and accepted the coffee gratefully. "You didn't have to cook for me." "Been cooking for myself since I was 15, he replied, setting a plate of food before her. "Besides, Miguel tells me you'll have plenty of people wanting to meet you in town today. Better face them on a full stomach." Zach's prediction proved accurate. Las Lunas, though small compared to the eastern cities Delilah had known, buzzed with activity as their wagon rolled down the main street. Miguel rode alongside them, pointing out the various establishments: the general store, the hotel, the saloon, the small church, and the doctor's office. Mrs. Garcia, a plump woman with a perpetually cheerful expression, emerged from the general store before they'd even properly stopped. "So this is the widow and baby Miguel told us about. Zachary Jones, you bring these two right inside out of this heat." She ushered Delilah and Samuel into the store's relative coolness with surprising strength. "My goodness, child, you look half-starved still, and this little one, what a precious face." Over the next hour, Delilah found herself the center of more kindness than she'd expected. Mrs. Garcia provided a basket of baby necessities: diapers, baby clothes, a proper bottle for the goat's milk. The hotel owner, Mr. Peterson, offered her a position helping with laundry and kitchen work, with quarters for her and Samuel included. "The room's small," he warned, "but clean. Used to be for storage, but my wife fixed it up when our last maid left to get married. You can start whenever you're ready." Delilah glanced at Zach, who had remained quietly by her side throughout the introductions. "That's very kind, Mr. Peterson. Perhaps I could begin tomorrow." "I still need to." She trailed off, unsure how to explain the nebulous state of her life. "She needs to retrieve her belongings from her homestead," Zach finished smoothly. "I've offered to accompany her there today if Miguel can manage the ranch." Miguel nodded. "Of course, Senor Jones." "Take as long as needed." Delilah shot Zach a grateful look. She hadn't even considered returning to the place where Thomas had died, where they'd begun building their life together. The thought of facing it alone was overwhelming. As they left town with promises to return the next day, Delilah cradling a much happier Samuel in her arms, she finally spoke. "You didn't have to offer to come with me. I'm sure you have work to do." Zach clicked to the horses, keeping his eyes on the road. "The cattle won't miss me for one day. Besides, you shouldn't have to face that alone." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape rolling by. Finally, Delilah asked the question that had been on her mind. "Have you always lived out here, Zach?" He shook his head. "Born in Pennsylvania. Father was a blacksmith, wanted me to follow in his footsteps. I had different ideas." He glanced at her. "How about you? You don't sound like you're from these parts either." Ohio, she replied. My father was a schoolteacher. Thomas was his best student, went on to become a teacher himself. We married young. I was 18, he was 23. When the opportunity came to homestead out west, Thomas saw it as an adventure, a chance to build something of our own. Was it what you expected? Zach asked gently. Delilah looked down at Samuel, stroking his soft cheek. Nothing ever is it? The land was harder than we thought. The isolation, the work. Thomas wasn't built for it, not really. He was more suited to books than plows, but he tried so hard. Her voice broke. Then the fever came. Zach's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of comfort that required no words. They continued on, the miles passing beneath the wagon wheels until Delilah pointed to a small structure in the distance. That's it, she said quietly. That was to be our home. The homestead was modest. A partially built cabin with only 2 walls properly finished, a small plot of turned earth that had been the beginning of a garden, now withered in the sun, and a crude wooden cross marking a fresh grave. Zach helped Delilah down from the wagon, his strong hands steadying her as her knees threatened to buckle at the sight of Thomas's grave. He held Samuel while she knelt beside it, her fingers tracing the letters Thomas had taught so many children to write, now crudely carved into the wooden marker. I did my best, she whispered to her husband's resting place. I'll make sure Samuel knows about you, about your dreams, I promise. Zach stood a respectful distance away, giving her the privacy of her grief. When she finally rose, wiping tears from her face, he asked softly, What would you like to take with you? There wasn't much. Some clothes, a family Bible, a few books Thomas had treasured, kitchen items that had survived the journey west. A small trunk contained all the worldly possessions Delilah wanted to keep from her former life. As they loaded the trunk onto the wagon, Zach paused, looking at the unfinished cabin. Your husband had a good eye for land. This soil would grow well with proper irrigation. Delilah nodded. He chose it for the view, said he wanted to see the mountains from our porch. She glanced at the distant peaks. I don't think I can sell it, not yet. It was his dream. No need to decide today, Zach assured her. Land will wait, been doing so a lot longer than any of us have been around. They left the homestead as the afternoon shadows lengthened, Delilah taking one last look at the place that had briefly been her home, at the grave of the man who had been her first love. There was a finality to the moment, a closing of one chapter of her life. What the next would bring, she couldn't guess. The return journey to Zach's ranch was quieter, both lost in their thoughts. Samuel slept peacefully between them, exhausted from the day's adventures and well-fed from the goat's milk they'd brought along. Thank you, Delilah said as the ranch came into view. For everything. Zach gave her a sidelong glance, his expression thoughtful. No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same. No, she disagreed. They wouldn't have. Most would have given me directions to town and ridden on. You shared your last bread with a stranger. He seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude, shrugging it off. You'd have done the same if positions were reversed. That night, after a simple supper, Delilah sat on the porch of Zach's cabin, watching the stars emerge in the vast New Mexico sky. Samuel slept inside, his little body finally relaxed now that his hunger had been satisfied. Zach joined her, offering a cup of coffee. Last night in a proper bed before hotel life, he remarked, settling into the chair beside hers. Peterson's place is decent enough, but nothing like the quiet out here. Delilah sipped the coffee, savoring its warmth. I've been thinking about that, the hotel job. Having second thoughts. No, it's a good opportunity, it's just… She hesitated, gathering her courage. I wondered if perhaps you might need help here at the ranch. I noticed your garden could use tending and the cabin. She trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by her presumption. Zach was silent for a long moment, and Delilah feared she had offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. Are you offering to work here instead of the hotel? I could cook, clean, tend the garden, she said quickly. I'm stronger than I look, and I learn fast. Samuel and I wouldn't be a burden, we'd earn our keep. Another long pause followed. It's not proper. A young widow living at a bachelor's ranch, Zach finally said, though his tone suggested he was repeating what society would say rather than his own objection. I know, Delilah admitted, but the thought of being in town surrounded by strangers when I've just lost everything. She took a deep breath. I need time, Zach, time to figure out what comes next, and Samuel, he needs stability. Zach turned to look at her, his expression serious in the moonlight. People will talk. They always do, she replied with a small smile. But I've found that survival matters more than reputation. He considered her words, then nodded slowly. Miguel comes by daily and his wife visits often. That should quiet some gossip. And the cabin does need a woman's touch, that's certain. A hint of a smile crossed his face. Plus, Miguel's cooking is terrible. Delilah felt relief flood through her. I can start earning my keep right away. Tomorrow Zach held up a hand, cutting her off. Tomorrow we'll go into town as planned. You'll thank Mr. Peterson for his offer but explain you've found another position. We'll get whatever supplies you and Samuel need, then we'll come back here and figure out the details. His practical approach steadied her. Thank you, she said simply. Don't thank me yet, he warned with a wry smile. Wait until you've tasted my coffee for a week. Might send you running back to the hotel. The arrangement began tentatively. Delilah established herself in what had been Miguel's room while Zach returned to his own. She rose early each morning to prepare breakfast before Zach and Miguel headed out to work with the cattle. During the day, she cleaned the long-neglected cabin, planted new vegetables in the garden, and cared for Samuel, who grew stronger and more active daily. The townsfolk of Las Lunas had indeed gossiped initially about the arrangement, but Rosa's frequent visits and Reverend William's grudging approval after a visit to assess the situation helped quiet the worst of it. Mrs. Garcia became a regular visitor as well, bringing supplies and news from town. As summer turned to fall, Delilah found herself settling into life at the ranch. Samuel took his first crawling steps on the cabin floor while Zach watched with undisguised delight. The garden flourished under Delilah's care, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She learned to make cheese from the goat's milk, to preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter, and even to bake bread in the temperamental oven. For his part, Zach seemed to thrive with their presence. The cabin, once merely a place to sleep between long days of work, became a home. He built a proper crib for Samuel, crafted shelves for Delilah's few books, and even brought home fabric from town so she could make curtains for the windows. They developed a comfortable routine, sharing meals and conversation. In the evenings, Zach would often read aloud from one of Thomas's books while Delilah sewed or mended. It was a peaceful existence, healing for them both in different ways. But as winter approached, bringing cooler temperatures and shorter days, something began to shift between them. Delilah would catch Zach watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his gaze lingering a moment too long. For her part, she found herself more aware of his presence, the sound of his voice, the way his hands moved as he worked. One evening in early December, as snow fell gently outside the cabin windows, Delilah sat by the fire, rocking Samuel to sleep. Zach entered quietly, removing his coat and boots by the door, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. Storm's picking up, he said, moving to warm his hands by the fire. Cattle are safe in the lower pasture. Miguel's staying in town tonight. Roads will be too treacherous by morning. Delilah nodded, continuing to rock Samuel, who was fighting sleep despite his heavy eyelids. I made stew. It's keeping warm on the stove. Zach served himself, settling into a chair across from her. For a while, the only sounds were the crackling fire, Samuel's occasional coo, and Zach's spoon against the bowl. The domesticity of the moment struck Delilah suddenly. How natural it felt, how right, despite the circumstances that had brought them together. He's growing so fast, Zach commented, nodding toward Samuel, who had finally surrendered to sleep. Seems like just yesterday he was that tiny, hungry baby on the road. 4 months tomorrow since you found us, Delilah said softly. Sometimes it feels like another lifetime. Zach set his empty bowl aside, his expression thoughtful. Do you still think about Thomas often? The question surprised her, but she answered honestly. Every day, but differently now. At first it was with such pain, such loss. Now I think of him with gratitude for the time we had, for giving me Samuel. Zach nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's as it should be. The pain fades, but the love remains. Delilah studied him, this man who had become so important to her life. You speak as if from experience. A shadow crossed his face. My mother lost her when I was 16. Took years before I could think of her without anger at being left behind. And your father, still alive far as I know. Back in Pennsylvania, still disappointed his only son chose cattle over anvils. He smiled ruefully. We exchanged letters at Christmas, polite, distant. He remarried a few years after mother died, has a new family now. Delilah rose, carefully placing Samuel in his crib. When she returned to her seat, she found Zach staring into the fire, his expression distant. Zach, she said gently, why did you really help us that day, the truth? He looked up, surprised by the directness of her question. For a moment she thought he might deflect again, but instead he sighed. Truth. When I saw you standing there, holding Samuel, looking so determined despite everything, it reminded me that courage comes in many forms. Most men I know would call me brave for breaking wild horses or standing down cattle rustlers, but I've never done anything as brave as what you did, walking into the unknown with a baby, nothing but hope to guide you. His honesty touched her deeply. It wasn't bravery, it was desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing, he countered. And maybe I was a little desperate too, for something more than just surviving out here, something to care about beyond cattle and crops. The admission hung between them, more revealing than perhaps he'd intended. Delilah felt her heart quicken, aware they were approaching a threshold neither had acknowledged until now. You've given us so much, Zach, she said softly. A home, safety, kindness. You've given just as much back, he replied. This place was just a building before, now it's a home. Their eyes met across the space between them, and Delilah saw in his gaze a reflection of her own conflicted feelings, attraction tempered by loyalty to the past, hope shadowed by fear of loss. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack from the fire. Zach stood, clearing his throat. It's getting late. I should check the barn once more before turning in. Delilah nodded, suddenly uncertain. Of course. Good night, Zach. He paused at the door, looking back at her. Delilah, I'm glad you stayed. After he left, she sat for a long time by the fire, thinking about the path that had led her here and wondering where it might lead next. The winter deepened, bringing heavy snows that sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time. These snowbound periods became a special time for the unlikely family they had formed. Zach taught Delilah to play checkers and cards. She read aloud from Thomas's books while Zach carved wooden animals for Samuel, who was now sitting up on his own and babbling happily. As Christmas approached, Delilah secretly worked on gifts for Zach, a new shirt sewn from fabric Mrs. Garcia had brought on her last visit before the heavy snows, and a scarf knitted from wool Miguel's wife had provided. She wanted to show her gratitude for all he had done. Though no gift seemed adequate on Christmas Eve, they sat before a fire adorned with pine branches Zach had brought in from the forest. Samuel played on a quilt nearby, fascinated by the flickering shadows cast by the flames. I have something for you, Zach said, reaching behind his chair to produce a small wooden box. It's not much, but I thought you might like it. Delilah opened the box to find a silver locket, simple but beautiful, on a delicate chain. Zach, it's lovely, but I can't accept, please, he interrupted. I want you to have it. Open it. Inside the locket was a tiny drawing of Samuel, remarkably detailed despite its size. How? Mrs. Garcia's nephew is an artist. I had him do the drawing last time I was in town, then found the locket at the general store. Thought you might like something to keep him close to your heart, even when he's grown. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes. The thoughtfulness of the gift overwhelmed her. Will you help me put it on? She turned, lifting her hair as Zach fastened the chain around her neck, his fingers warm against her skin. When she faced him again, something in his expression made her breath catch. "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving her gifts from where she'd hidden them. "Not nearly as special, I'm afraid." Zach unwrapped the shirt and scarf with genuine appreciation. "No one's made me clothes since my mother. Thank you, Delilah." He ran his fingers over the careful stitching of the shirt. "This is fine work." "There's one more thing," she said hesitantly, handing him a folded piece of paper. "It's silly, really." Zach opened it to find a drawing her attempt to capture the ranch as it looked in summer, with the garden in full bloom, the mountains in the distance, and 3 figures on the porch: a man, a woman, and a small child. "It's how I see this place," she explained, suddenly shy, "how I see us." Zach studied the drawing for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he looked up, there was a new light in his eyes. "Is this how you want it to be, us together making a life here?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Yes," she admitted, "but I know it's complicated." "I was another man's wife not so long ago. 6 months, Zach said quietly. "Is it long enough to mourn? Society would say no, but life out here doesn't always follow those rules. People find each other when they need to, not when some arbitrary time has passed." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "I care for you, Delilah, for Samuel too. These months with you here, it's been more than just helping a widow and her child. It's been finding something I didn't know I was looking for." Delilah felt tears threaten again. "I care for you too, Zach. More than I thought possible after Thomas. But I'm afraid of losing again, afraid of what people might think, afraid this is all happening too fast." Zach's thumb gently stroked the back of her hand. "I'm not asking for promises tonight, just honesty. Just to know if what I feel is only in my heart, or if there's a chance you might someday feel the same." "It's not only in your heart," she whispered. "But I need time. For Samuel, for myself, to be sure," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Time we have, Delilah, I'm not going anywhere." As if sensing the importance of the moment, Samuel chose that instant to pull himself up on the edge of a chair, standing shakily for the first time. Both adults turned to watch, delight momentarily overriding the intensity of their conversation. "Look at you," Delilah exclaimed, moving to kneel beside her son. "Standing all on your own," Zach joined her, his face alight with pride. "That's it, little man. Soon you'll be running all over this ranch." Samuel gave them a gummy smile before plopping back down on his bottom, pleased with himself. The shared joy of the moment seemed to ease the tension that had built between them, replacing it with something warmer, more certain. Later, after Samuel had been put to bed, they stood together at the cabin door, looking out at the star-filled sky and the snow-covered landscape glowing silver in the moonlight. "Merry Christmas, Delilah," Zach said softly, his arm around her shoulders in a gesture that felt both protective and questioning. Delilah leaned into him slightly, allowing herself this small step toward what her heart increasingly wanted. "Merry Christmas, Zach." As winter gradually yielded to spring, the relationship between Zach and Delilah evolved with careful tenderness. They didn't speak again directly of what had passed between them on Christmas Eve, but small changes marked the shifting landscape of their connection. Zach's hand would linger when passing her a plate at dinner. Delilah found reasons to straighten his collar or brush dirt from his shoulder. They began to sit closer by the fire in the evenings, sometimes reading from the same book, shoulders touching. Samuel, now nearly a year old and taking his first tentative steps, became the bridge between them, a source of shared joy and mutual purpose. Zach taught him to feed the chickens they had acquired, holding his tiny hands to scatter corn. Delilah watched them together, her heart full at how naturally Zach had stepped into a father's role without trying to replace Thomas in Samuel's life. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pasture, chicks in the coop, fresh growth in the expanded garden. Delilah felt herself blooming too, shedding the grief that had weighed her down, embracing the possibility of new happiness. The day Samuel took his first real steps, toddling unsteadily from Delilah to Zach across the cabin floor, something crystallized for her. Watching Zach catch her son, swinging him up in celebration, hearing their mingled laughter, Delilah knew with sudden clarity that she had found her home not in a place, but in the family they were creating together. That night after Samuel was asleep, she found Zach on the porch, gazing at the stars as was his habit. She joined him, sitting closer than she might have before. "He's going to be running by summer," Zach said, smiling at the thought. "We should fence the garden if we want to save any vegetables from those little exploring hands." "I've been thinking," Delilah said, gathering her courage, "about what you said at Christmas, about us, about making a life here together." Zach turned to her, his expression careful, hopeful. "And I don't need more time, Zach. I know what I feel now." She reached for his hand, entwining their fingers. "I love you. Not the same way I loved Thomas, that was different, the love of a girl becoming a woman. This is deeper somehow, built on friendship and respect and shared hardship." The joy that spread across Zach's face was like sunrise. "I love you too, Delilah, have for months now." He squeezed her hand. "But are you sure? There's no rush." "I'm sure," she said with quiet certainty. "Life is too unpredictable, too precious to waste when you know what you want." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "And what is it you want, Delilah Byrne?" "A life with you," she answered simply. "A family for Samuel, more children perhaps someday, this ranch our home, growing together." Zach released her hand to cup her face gently. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. In answer, Delilah leaned forward, closing the distance between them. Their first kiss was tender, a promise exchanged without words. When they parted, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not someday, not eventually, soon. I want to be your husband, Samuel's father in truth as well as action." Delilah smiled, joy bubbling up within her. "Yes, as soon as you like." They were married in May when the desert bloomed with unexpected color. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Reverend Williams officiating. The people of Las Lunas came: Mrs. Garcia and her husband, Mr. Peterson from the hotel, Miguel and Rosa and their sons, and others who had come to know and respect the couple over the past months. Samuel, now walking steadily and beginning to form words, was held by Rosa during the ceremony, clapping his hands at the applause when Zach and Delilah were pronounced husband and wife. Their wedding feast was a community affair, with everyone contributing dishes. Music played as the sun set, and Zach led Delilah in a dance on the hard-packed earth of the yard, their friends forming a circle around them. "Happy, Mrs. Jones?" he asked, holding her close as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "I found a starving woman and her baby on the road, shared my last loaf of bread and gained a family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'd say I got the better end of that bargain." Later, after the guests had departed and Samuel slept soundly in his crib, moved to what had been Miguel's room, Zach and Delilah stood together in the doorway of what was now truly their bedroom. "I never thought I'd have this again," Delilah admitted, suddenly shy despite the months of growing closeness. "A husband, a family, hope for the future." Zach lifted her hand, kissing the simple gold band he had placed there that day. "I never thought I'd have it at all. Was convinced I'd live and die alone on this ranch with nothing but cattle for company." He drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper now, more urgent. "I love you, Delilah Jones," he murmured against her lips. "Forever, if you'll have me that long." "Forever sounds about right," she agreed, letting him lead her into their room, into their future together. The years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges to the Jones family. Samuel grew from a toddler to a sturdy boy with Delilah's eyes and a quiet thoughtfulness that reminded her of Thomas. He took to ranch life eagerly, following Zach everywhere, absorbing knowledge of cattle and horses and the land. 2 years after their wedding, Delilah gave birth to a son they named William, after Zach's father. The elder Jones, hearing of his new grandson, made the journey from Pennsylvania to meet the family his son had created. The reunion was initially awkward. years of distance and disappointment standing between father and son. But William Jones found himself disarmed by his grandchildren and by Delilah's gentle determination to mend the rift. "You've done well for yourself, son," the older man admitted as they sat on the porch one evening, watching Delilah teach Samuel letters in the dirt yard. "Different from what I wanted for you, but well, all the same." "Thank you, Pa," Zach replied, the childhood name slipping out after years of more formal address. "That means more than you know." When William Jones departed 2 weeks later, he left with promises to return and perhaps to bring his wife next time. The correspondence between father and son grew more frequent, more personal. Another wound healed in the desert air. A daughter, Rebecca, joined the family 3 years after William, bringing a new kind of energy to the ranch with her headstrong ways and infectious laugh. Zach doted on his daughter shamelessly, already dreading the day boys from town would come calling. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Zach's cattle business expanded, while Delilah's garden grew to supply not only their family but produce for sale in town. They added onto the cabin as the family grew, built a proper barn, and even established a small schoolroom where Delilah taught the children their letters and numbers. There were hard times too, a drought that nearly broke them, illnesses that swept through the territory, the death of Reverend Williams, who had become a dear friend. But through it all, Zach and Delilah faced life together, their bond growing stronger with each passing season. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Zach surprised Delilah with a special gift, the deed to the land where Thomas was buried, which he had quietly purchased years before to ensure it would always belong to her. "I know part of your heart will always be there," he said as he handed her the papers. "I wanted you to have this piece of his dream to pass on to Samuel someday if he wishes." Delilah, moved beyond words, could only embrace him, marveling at the generosity of spirit that allowed her husband to honor the man she had loved before him. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Samuel, now 12 and lanky, William, a sturdy 8-year-old, Rebecca 5, and fearless Delilah leaned against Zach's shoulder. "You ever think about that day," she asked, "when you found us on the road?" Zach's arm tightened around her. "Often. One decision to stop instead of riding by and everything changed. You saved us," she said simply. "Not just from hunger that day, but from a life without this." She gestured to the thriving ranch, their beautiful children, the home they had built together. "No," Zach disagreed gently. "You saved yourself, Delilah. You were walking toward Las Lunas, determined to find a way. You would have made it with or without me." "Perhaps," she conceded. "But I'm glad it was with you." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Delilah thought about the journey that had brought her here, the young teacher's wife who had followed her husband's dream west, the desperate widow who had walked miles with her baby to find help, the woman who had found unexpected love and built a new life from the ashes of the old. "What are you thinking?" Zach asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "That life never takes us where we expect," she replied, "but sometimes, if we're very lucky, it takes us exactly where we need to be." Zach smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening, lines earned from years of squinting in the sun, from laughter, from a life fully lived. "And where's that?" Delilah looked at their children playing, at the home they had built together, at the man who had shared his last loaf of bread with a stranger and in doing so had changed both their lives forever. "Home," she said simply. "It takes us home."